And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Space Academy Takeover. We're taking over the National Space Centre's social media channels this week to host Q&A sessions with interesting people from the space sector. My name's Kieran, and I'm the General Manager of the National Space Academy, and I'm one of the hosts for this Takeover week. And right now, I am joined by Fede Rescigno, who is doing research that's allowing her to hunt for exoplanets, and she's going to tell us more about that and how it fits with her other research. So hello, Fede, how are you?
Hi everyone, I'm good, thank you. It's nice to be on here. So I'll share a couple of slides to kind of tell you all about what I do real quick.
Yeah, great.
Here we are, and let's start. So hi again everyone, my name is Fede Rescigno, Fede for short. I did most of my schooling in Italy where I was born, but I finished my high school in the US and then moved to the UK to do my undergrads in Durham. I am now a PhD student at Exeter University under Raphaëlle Haywood. On a basic level, I would call myself a planet hunter, meaning that I help in the detection and characterizations of worlds outside of our own solar system, which we call exoplanets. I mainly focus on stellar variation and understanding how to account for it when we do look for stars and different planets. So I mainly focus.
Fede, just to say, I've just got your sound coming in a bit quiet there. Just wondered if you could check your mic and see whether that's me or whether that's you.
I can come a bit closer to the mic.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks.
So do you feel me better? Do you hear me better?
Yes, great, thank you.
Okay, so what I was saying, yes, that there are many ways to find exoplanets, but what I focus on is radial velocity. So let's start from the start. So gravitational pull of a star is what keeps a planet in orbit around it. But a planet also reciprocates this pull, and both star and planet orbit around the common center of mass. The radial velocity method, or Doppler spectroscopy, relies on observing these little wobbles in the star to search for a planet. The movement can be deduced by looking at the light emitted from the star and looking at how the specific and unique spectral lines or absorption lines of the light of a star shift towards the red or blue side of the spectrum. And measuring how much this shift changes in time can allow us to deduce the presence of the planet and even calculate how big it is. But nothing is ever that easy. So stars are not static objects. They breathe, they flare up, as you can see in the pictures. They have cold spots and they have magnetic field. And all of these events generate what we call stellar-induced RV variations. And any information that we can get, any signal that we can get from an Earth-like planet is completely drowned by this avalanche of other informations. Astronomers have learned, therefore, to differentiate between what is Earth, like planet signal, something like this, from what we know as stellar activity. And to sum up in a very pretty sentence, we can say that for the detection of Earth-like exoplanets and for the study of their atmosphere in the search of biosignatures, which are signs of life as we know it, we need to break the stellar activity barrier. And we do this by studying the physical processes that give rise to this RV variation, to these radial velocity variations. And we create computer models that predict them. And this is kind of what I do. I look at the sun because it's the star that we know best, that it's closest to us. And I look at pictures taken by the Solar Dynamics Observatory using the helioseismic magnetic imager, which is way too much of a mouthful. So we call them SDO-HMI images. And from images like what you see in the screen now, I ask myself questions like, how much do the dark dots affect radial velocity? What kind of information can we get from the magnetic flux? How much do these active areas, those very magnetically active areas, occupy on the sun? And by asking all these questions, I get to plot pretty pictures. So lags, how often things repeat on a time scale, how do they correlate, meaning how well do the signal map each other's behavior, and even just look at how they evolve in time. And it's surprising just how much information you can get by just looking at a couple of images from the sun. And this allowed me to work not only with images from the SDO, but I work with astronomers from HARPS North, and I'm currently in the Terra Hunting experiment project that it's going to soon be live on the HARPS 3. And overall, I'm a pretty early career, so I'm excited to see where I will be going with my and where I find my niche in my work. And if you have any more questions, you can find me on Twitter. But thank you for kind of listening to this very short introduction of what I do.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Fede. That's a great explanation. So I think I kind of knew that we detected exoplanets around stars by seeing the movement of the star, and by detecting the star. Like, we can't resolve and see an exoplanet. We don't have that telescopic power. Is that right? So we have to detect it by what the star's doing. Is that correct?
Yes, there are some cases in which we can actually see the planets, but they are very, very, very rare. Mostly we look for exoplanet by using how the star changes. So the technique I'm using, RV, looks at how the stars wobble. Another technique, which is transient photometry, tries to look at the star changes in luminosity, because when something passes in front of the star, you can see there is a bit of drop in luminosity. But there's various different techniques, but no, it's very rare to actually be able to see to resolve the planet.
So it's quite a lot of detective work, and I think people are quite familiar with the idea of planets transiting in front of stars and detecting that, because we have the transit of Venus, for example. We see that from the Earth, so that's an analogy that we've all experienced. But I guess you have to do detective work and go and look and kind of. I suppose you have to compare lots of different data sets to work out what you're seeing.
Yes, mostly because it's not straightforward to see that a wobble from the star is given by a planet, which is our big hurdle when we do radial velocity. We don't always know, and sometimes people get it wrong. There have been cases before when people thought there was a planet, and actually there was none. So it's a lot of, why do we have this signal here? Why don't we have that signal there? Let's try and simulate what could possibly be happening to see if that's the case or that's not the case. And it's still, by self radial velocity, it's still not 100% perfect. That's why in any case, we always require kind of a confirmation with another technique. Just for transient photometry, for example, they cannot just say for sure that that's a planet. They require something else. They require radial velocity, microlensing. And we as radial velocity also require someone else to do their own research and be like, yeah, we can also see the planet, so we agree.
So you have to collaborate with different scientists and projects to say, this is what I've found. Does that match up?
Yeah. Yes, it's important to talk to each other, and it's not super easy, but it's vital if you really want to say that you found a planet.
So you mentioned that one of the projects that you're going to work on is the Terra, what is it called? The Terra Hunting?
Terra Hunting experiment.
So that's presumably looking for Earth-like planets.
So the aim of that specific project is to find terras, which is a fancy word for Earth. And we're looking for planets that have similar size and density and dimensions to our own Earth in what we call a habitable zone. So we look at sun-like stars, and we hope to find Earth-like planets orbiting around 1 year around the sun, so that they might be in what we call the habitable zone. The habitable zone is that sweet spot in a stellar system where it's not too cold, it's not too far from the star that all water freezes, but it's also not too close to a star, not too hot that all water evaporates. And that's kind of the presence of liquid water is what we define as a very, very basic necessity for life as we know it.
And I think I've heard the habitable zone called the Goldilocks zone, because it's not too hot or too cold, it's just right, like the story some people grew up with the three bears.
Yeah, that's definitely a good analogy.
So one of our students, Alex, has asked, what are the chances of finding an Earth-like planet? Have you found any that you think are Earth-like out there already?
So there are definitely Earth-like planets, but we have to pay attention what we mean by Earth-like planets.
Okay.
Do we mean a habitated planet? Not yet.
Okay.
Do we mean a planet that kind of looks like Earth in dimensions and density? Yes, we found them. We know they exist. We know sometimes they orbit a bit too close to the star, sometimes a bit too far. We have yet to find an Earth-like planet that we deem as habitable. And that's mostly because of what I said, because the stars just completely drowns that kind of signal. And it's very hard to find. And hopefully with the Terra Hunter experiment, we might get there. We mostly want to look for the possibility of it. We don't know if it's gonna be there, but if no one searches for it, then no one will ever find it, right?
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. You've got to start looking. And I mean, I think it blows my mind to think that we can look out at stars and observe their light and then deduce the existence of these planets. And with the radial velocity method, I guess that is also, if it's on a different plane, so the planets are orbiting around that, so they're orbiting around that rather than orbiting this way, and presumably at all different angles as well, because they're not just going to come in that two ways. And I think you've answered one of our students' questions. Yuri had asked, what are the main characteristics you look for when identifying a star with exoplanets? And you talked about, seeing those changes.
Yeah, so usually there's like a couple of few things we need to think about when we actually look for a star that could have Earth-like planets. First of all, any star could have an Earth-like planet, but not all Earth-like planets can be detected around all stars. So our game is more like, what's a star in which an Earth-like planet could be easily detected? That's more of the question we ask ourselves. So we're looking for sun-like stars, meaning stars that are similar to the sun, because we know the sun very well, and we can kind of apply our knowledge from the sun to those stars. We also want stars that are not too young, because they will have a lot of flaring, a lot of spots, a lot of magnetic activity going on, which makes our life so much harder. And we also do not want any smaller stars, because we don't really know what's going on with the magnetic dynamo of M dwarf, for example. So we do look for a specific type of stars, not really because they are the only types of stars we can find Earth-like planets in, but because they are our best chance to find one at the moment.
Okay. So our sun becomes the star, as you said earlier, that we know the most about. So when we're looking at other stars, we can learn from the sun in order to do that. And I really like that you shared the images that we can get of the sun, because I guess on the day-to-day we think of the sun as this kind of uniform ball just shining at us, but those images tell a different story. Like, what kind of features have you been looking at our sun?
All stars are very much not just static objects. And the more you look at them, the more you discover how varied they are, how different they are from each other. For example, the sun has a lot of different, like little or big areas that in which the surface is actually a lot colder than everything else. And they show as like dark little spots. And there's also areas in which the temperature is a bit higher up, so they shine a bit brighter than anything else. And there's like on the limbs, so on the sides of the sun, it doesn't shine as strongly because of a thing we call limb darkening. So there's flows of material going from like up and down and inside the sun towards us. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of fluid dynamic that we have to understand to really understand what's going on in the sun. And it's quite fascinating to see that we, as like, when we look at the sun, not directly, hopefully, we see just light, just unfiltered straight light. But if we look closely, it's so inhomogeneous, it's so varied, and it rotates every 25 days. So in 25 days, we see something that's completely different.
That's amazing. And I guess for those of us who aren't astronomers, even the knowledge that the sun rotates, but of course it does when you think about it, you think, oh, well, everything in space is pretty much spinning around each other and other things. Fede, there are a lot of stars and people have been observing stars with telescopes for a very long time. So you've talked about how you try to choose stars where you're likely to be able to detect an Earth-like planet if it's there. So how do you decide which stars and which data sets you're looking at? I mean, is that something you have to work together with other scientists to say, oh, I'm going to look at these stars, or this is the data we've got from there?
So it kind of depends on what kind of project, what's your aim. But normally, before we truly start to look for a planet, we look at the star by itself. We do studies on like how it behaves, what's going on, what type of star it is. We look, for example, at its color, so where it's brightest in our in the spectra. We look at how young or old we think it is, and obviously exoplanetologists do not do most of this work. So we have to rely on stellar scientists. And I'm very much on like the edge between planetology, exoplanetology, and stellar science. So I get to see both of like the best of both worlds kind of thing. But it's very much a cooperative activity. It's not just one group that can do it. And especially because there are just so many stars in the sky, it's going to be impossible to just go through one by one personally to figure out what's going on. So stellar scientists give us some kind of indexes, some kind of like categorization that allow us to kind of shrink the incredible numbers of stars that we can actually look at to something that it's more manageable. And then we go and cherry pick the ones we like based on what the scientists, the solar scientists and the stellar scientists have told us.
That's fantastic to think about. And I'm imagining that the stars that we're talking about are stars in our Milky Way galaxy, or are there people looking at stars in other galaxies, or is that too far away to see these effects?
So we definitely can see stars in other galaxies. We can see very far in the sky with specific types of telescopes. But when it comes to planet hunting, for the moment, we're still very much inside our own galaxy. But maybe someday, if we understand better what stars are doing, we can get better and better precisions with our instruments. And at some point, we'll be able to kind of look further and further like away from us.
That's just amazing to think about. One of our students, Ben, has asked, what happens if you find an Earth-like planet that really feels like it could have the perfect environment for life, like the life we have on our planet?
First and foremost, you freak out. Because that's a discovery of a lifetime. After that, you run to all your like groups and projects to double check, because the biggest sin of a scientist is to rush to results. Even if you get something doesn't mean it's right. So you ask a lot of different people to corroborate, to check your results using different methods. And if everyone comes out and says, yeah, I kind of agree with you, then at that moment, you start to think of what's next. Obviously, you tell everyone and everything, and news are going to be going crazy. But at that point, it's like, we know that this planet could have life, but like, what does having life mean? Like, we're looking for something that's similar to us. We're looking for signatures in the atmosphere that match what we have on Earth. But like, do they have to be similar to us? What does habitable truly mean? There's a lot of different factors to take into consideration before we actually say anything. And also, we are looking for life as we know it. But we only have one data point, which is us. And as scientists, we know that one data point is not the best. But it's a place to start, I guess.
Yeah. So you're right. We know what life on Earth is like, and the universe is very wild and wonderful. And I keep hearing from people like yourself about the different objects they're studying or finding out about. And it's almost like beyond imagination, the kind of things that people study. You mentioned about how if we did find a candidate planet and we'd look for, I think you called them biosignatures, so evidence that maybe there's life in. So what is a biosignature? What kind of thing would you be looking for?
So we call biosignatures any kind of concentrations in the atmosphere of a planet of atoms and molecules that we relate to civilization. For example, the specific balances of oxygen and carbon dioxide to CO2 and O2 can tell us if there might be some photosynthesis going on. This is one type of biosignature. The amount of ozone can also try to help us understand if there's anything going on there. And this is obviously not very straightforward because we need very high precisions and very good measurements. But we can start to kind of look at the atmosphere of this planet, look at our atmosphere, what we created in our atmosphere, because we as humans are inevitably changing the planet we're on, not just on the surface, but we're changing the air. We're changing how it looks from outside. So if other people looking in, they could find signatures of us being here in our atmosphere. And that's kind of what we're doing upside down to other planets. We're looking for any kind of signs that something has been produced artificially, that is not coming from the planet being a planet.
So this is again mind-blowing. So the idea is that when you're looking at the light from this star that has a candidate planet, from that light you can work out some of the light is coming reflected from the planet, and from that light signature you can work out about the atmospheric makeup and possibly find out if it looks like photosynthesis is happening, you mentioned. But the idea that there could be another civilization, maybe even on that Earth-like candidate planet, developing the same technology and could see us, that's a wonderful thing to think about. And I guess we'll never in our lifetimes, or maybe even in many lifetimes, know if that is the case, because I guess even if you could detect those biosignatures, sending a signal to something at that distance. So Ben asked about how possible would exploration be? And I think the distances we're talking about mean that it would be many, many lifetimes before we'd be able to.
Yes.
About space travel then.
At the moment, we are focusing on moving around in our own solar system, which is already not that easy. But then again, we've been broadcasting signals for a while. We also have to realize that we shouldn't expect alien life to be the green little alien that we see in Hollywood movies. It could be microbes. It could be just dinosaurs. We are very much one type of people, and we're looking at the star in one type of way. And it's kind of presumptuous to think that everyone else would evolve like us and see and look at the star like us. But yeah, explorations could be great. I wouldn't say necessarily in our lifetime, but then again, dream big. But it's something that could be interesting even with that within our solar system, because we are thinking that maybe to look for life, we don't have to look that far. We can look inside our own solar system. We're not going to find humans for sure, but it might be interesting. And I always tell myself that I may not get anything in my lifetime, but my work is a puzzle piece. And to get to the end of the puzzle, you do need all the puzzle pieces. So it's not about getting to the end. It's not about finding life. It's not about finding the Earth-like planet. It's about doing your kind of little piece of work so that someone else in the future can actually use your work and do even better and put another puzzle piece in, until at some point in the future, we might be able to get a bigger picture.
I'm grinning from ear to ear at that, Fede, because that's such a beautiful way of thinking about human pursuit of knowledge and what we want for, I think those of us who are interested in space often have a real interest in exploration and the kind of idea of understanding our universe as well as our own planet, and to think of it as your research being this one puzzle piece, and that it helps to bring the whole puzzle together, that big picture. It's a really beautiful image for that. And of course we have, you mentioned about in our own solar system, you know, we had the Perseverance rover is going to be caching samples to look for biomarkers, which is another word to mean clues that might mean life once existed on Mars. And we've also got the planetary atmosphere of Mars that people have looked at and said, oh, hang on, is there methane there and phosphine in Venus? And people are still working out and corroborating to see if that means something and what we can learn from those planets. I'd like to ask Fede a bit more about you yourself and your career so far. So you talked about your studies, and you've said that your relatively early career for a researcher. And you obviously really care about what you do. Is this something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
To the point of being cheesy, I personally knew from very early in my life that I really wanted to be an astronomer. It's not the case for everyone. This is very personal. But I remember reading the early books about astronomy with my dad and my mom, and then them telling me to kind of try and look out and see what's going on. And the universe always seemed such a grand thing, such a beautiful big thing, that I always kind of felt myself, I fell in love with it quite young. And I was also pretty lucky because I found myself being very comfortable with maths and physics when I went to middle and high school. And that allowed me to kind of pursue a higher degree in physics and astronomy. At that point, I know that physics and astronomy as a degree, a lot of people find it a bit challenging, and some people lose their direct passion to work in physics and astronomy, which doesn't mean losing passion for astronomy, but working for your passion is not necessarily like a thing that people enjoy. And I think that personally, I wanted to have like a spot for myself. And I found, like, by reading and learning of what's going on in the field, I found myself like falling into exoplanetology, and which is it's a very new field. It's like the first planet was discovered like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It's not been that long. And I always felt that exoplanetology was the place where I could kind of carve my place. And I feel like if anyone's thinking of like, if anyone likes something that doesn't have to be astronomy with a passion, what they want is trying to find their own place. And the only way to try and find your own place is to kind of experiment, look around, don't feel too forced in a position because you feel that's the best for you. Just let yourself branch out and look at different things. But I personally was very much, it was a bit of a serendipity kind of situation, and ended up exactly where I wanted to be.
That's fantastic. And I mean, it's true, not everyone knows what they want to do 100%, but some people do know, and space and astronomy is one of those subjects where people can get drawn to it at a very young age, because it is exciting, and because you can go out and look at the stars and experience that for yourself directly as a child or as an adult. And so that advice that you've given, that people can, if it's an area that interests them, I guess, find books about it maybe, or see if there are organizations that, like the National Space Centre might be one, but maybe local universities might do stargazing nights or other events, all obviously online at the moment, in order to find out about them. Is there any other advice you give to someone who knows that they definitely want to do astronomy or astrophysics?
Besides kind of like reading around, just look at what's going on at the moment. Like get involved with understanding what's going on with Perseverance, what's going on with exoplanetology, what are people discovering about cosmology. It doesn't have to be to a high level, but I'm sure that if you ask around to your, like, if you're in school, you can ask to teachers. If you're just out of school, you can look online. There's a lot of places to just kind of get involved in the present. It's not just about necessarily straight up understanding what's going on, but kind of dip your toes into it. And at that point, if you find yourself liking it, find people that are willing to kind of take your hand and walk you through this kind of thing. For example, when I was in undergrad, I was speaking with a professor that really enjoyed what they were doing, and they were able to kind of direct me the right way, the way that I felt more comfortable in. I remember when I was in middle school, I remember asking a lot of questions to my teachers about astronomy, and most of the time, teachers do like to talk to interested people. So never feel like you're not, like you don't know enough or you're not ready, and just reach out to people that know stuff. Reach out to people on Twitter, to scientists that have just discovered something. Ask them, what are you doing? What's going on with your research? And I tell you, most people will reply to you and will explain to you to a level you can understand. And it's the nice thing about social media, about this heavily like interconnected life on the internet. You can ask questions and people will answer.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Fede. That's great advice. You know, I know one researcher who's been doing loads of public engagement work at the moment, who said to me that she didn't realize that people would be so interested in her work. So I think sometimes researchers can be quite pleased when the general public are interested. And I think when someone has a passion about a subject like you do, you're always willing to share it with other people. And we really appreciate you coming on to share it with us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me over.
Yeah. And so that's us at the end of our time, which is a real shame because there's so many other things that I could ask Fede about. We didn't even get to what would you name your new Earth-like planet? But well, another time maybe. To everyone watching, remember you can see more of these Q&As all week here on the National Space Centre's YouTube channel, and you can get in touch with the National Space Academy on Twitter at UK Space Academy, or go to our website nationalspaceacademy.org, where you can find a form to contact us. And if you send us your space careers questions, we may be able to put them to our guests later in the week. Thanks again to Fede Rescigno, and wishing you all the best with finding that Earth-like planet, or being part of the team that does one day. We'd love to have you come back and tell us about your research in future. Thanks a lot, everyone, for watching, and we'll see